Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope you are all having a wonderful time so far at this year's convention. Again, my name is Kendall Williams. I'm a rising third-year law student at the University of Texas School of Law. This past year, I had the privilege of serving as the ACS Student Chapter President at UT, and I'm an ACS Next Generation Leader. I now have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Senator Mazie Hirono. Senator Hirono has been blazing trails since childhood. From humble beginnings and having overcome many obstacles, she started elementary school in the United States, not knowing a word of English. Upon graduating from Georgetown University Law Center, she devoted her life to public service and continued blazing trails, becoming the first female nominee for governor in Hawaii, the first elected female senator from Hawaii, the first Asian American woman elected to the Senate, and the first U.S. senator born in Japan. Senator Hirono says that she never forgets where she came from or who she fights for and why. Indeed, since the new administration has taken office, Senator Hirono has been amongst a truly inspiring group of women of color, speaking gracefully and vigorously against attacks on our Constitution and democracy. She is a true advocate for her state and for communities that share her experiences, and we're thrilled to share this space with her today. Please welcome Senator Hirono.
I'm glad that this is a see-through podium, otherwise you get to see only the top of my head, which I always say is not a good look for a United States Senator, you know? Although I have to say that the first time I ever went to the Supreme Court and I sat at council table, I wasn't making the argument, but I only really literally saw tufts of hair, you know, where the Supreme Court justices. So some of you you know what I'm talking about. I'm delighted to be here, of course. And a lot of times when I talk with people with whom I know I'm so simpatico, we're on the same page, I just like to chat. But I know I'm before a very distinguished group of really smart people, so I actually have a speech. So I'm going to give it, okay? One of the things that I'd also like to do is I understand that Professor Bill Marshall is here. Bill? I can't really see the audience very well, but Bill was on the last panel when we were doing the Neil Gorsuch hearings, and I remember we had some discussions about what the heck is originalism. It's all coming back to me now. So welcome to everyone. I know you've traveled from all over the country to gather today, and like many of you, I have been wrestling with Donald Trump's presidency. And of course, I have significant disagreements with the president on policy, but my concerns with the president goes way beyond policy. This past weekend, I met a father who asked me, how do I tell my son that lying is not good? And it really brought it home to me. So as I struggle with how do I think about this totally unpredictable person, the very unlikely results of what I call the incident or the event last November, I think we're all wrestling with how to instill good values in our communities when the President of the United States seems to demonstrate such contempt for the norms. Values such as honesty, humility, inclusiveness, respect for others. But this isn't just a time to question the president's values, it's an opportunity to reaffirm our own. We can start by asking a simple question. What does it mean to be an American? Statements of American values can be found in so many places, such as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. I don't know about you, but when I was in elementary school, I had to memorize parts of the Gettysburg Address. Did you have to do that too? That's how important, those words were to us. Testimonial to the value of devotion and to sacrifice. The inscription on the Statue of Liberty, which welcomes all, the tired, the poor, the huddled masses, to become Americans. Our Constitution, which places a commitment to the rule of law and to forming a more perfect union at the center of American life. Our values embody shared ideas that bind us together. And of course, our nation's values are more than nice-sounding aspirational words. They are manifest through actions, how we treat each other, how we will even go to war to protect our cherished democracy, how we will become lawyers, judges, or politicians to fight for equal rights and to provide everyone a chance to build a better life for themselves and their children. It was that promise of a better life in America that drove my courageous mother to risk everything to bring me to this country to take a chance for a better life for us. When I was nearly 8 years old, my mom plotted and planned in secret to bring my brothers and me to this country from Japan. And she was fleeing an abusive marriage. I never got to know my father very much, in fact, none at all. This courageous decision changed my life. It's why one of my life lessons learned is that one person can make a difference. We came to this country with very little in steerage on the President Cleveland. For many years, my mom worked minimum wage jobs with no benefits to put a roof over our heads and food on our table. And growing up in Hawaii, my greatest fear was that my mom would get sick. And if she got sick, she wouldn't be able to go to work. She didn't go to work, she got no pay. That we would often run out of money by the end of the month, so I know what it's like. And when I was introduced as saying that I know exactly who I fight for and why, is that kind of background that stays with me. So I come to Hawaii surrounded by a really diverse and welcoming community. I learned to speak English in public schools and dreamed of a better life for families like ours. I always knew early on I wanted to give back to my state and country that had given me opportunities I never would have had in Japan growing up on my grandparents' rice farm in a very, very rural part of Japan. I certainly knew nothing about the United States and nothing about Hawaii. But, you know, I very much recognize, as do so many immigrants who come to our country, leaving everything that they know behind, to come to this country and to realize how our lives have changed for the better, and that this desire to give back is a very strong commitment on my part. However, I never thought that politics would be the path that I would choose. After all, I come from a culture, you know, the Asian culture, we're not very talkative and not very confrontational. I've had to learn to do all those things, by the way. I'm a lot better at it. But my political awakening came in college when I spent a summer in Waimanalo, a low-income community on Oahu with many Native Hawaiian families. And I thought my life growing up as an immigrant was pretty tough, but in Waimanalo, I saw how poverty is pervasive, even in communities where people work hard and try to live by the rules. I began to think about how I could help bring about change in challenged communities like Waimanalo. Also in college, I protested against the Vietnam War and questioned our government's decision to send so many young people off to die, mainly men. I very much wanted a volunteer army. I became politically engaged, much as so many people across our country, and like you, have become or are becoming so much more politically engaged after Donald Trump's election. Activism led me to go back to school for a law degree 5 years after graduating from college to better prepare myself for whatever lay ahead. And I first ran for office in 1980. And I know I'm looking out at a lot of people who weren't even born in 1980. Yeah, I've been at it a long time. But I'm not done yet, not by a long shot. Let's face it, raising our voices and protesting, marching, those are all important actions. But we need to have seats at the table where decisions are made. And that is why I ran for office, that is why I'm here today, and why I'm still fired up to do more. After over 3 decades in public service, I finally come to acknowledge a label that I was always uncomfortable with for a long time. And that label is of a role model, and there are many more people now. I guess they figured out that I'm not like in my 20s anymore, 30s, and they come up to me and say, "You are a role model." It's not a moniker that I've ever felt particularly comfortable with, but I do realize, and I have realized, how important it is for young people of all stripes, including young men, young women, and people of color, to be able to see reflections of themselves in public officials, and to realize that there are many elected leaders who just want to help make other people's lives better. And this is particularly important at a time when so many people are anxious about our president's values and the disconnect they feel with him as our president. And from what I've seen and experienced so far, Donald Trump's values are not my values, and I don't think they are particularly your values either. This disconnect poses new and difficult challenges for American politics and law, and this is why I am focused so squarely on resisting his dangerous agenda for our country. It's why we must work together to strengthen the core principles, institutions, and traditions that make us Americans. And this is crucial in normal times, but absolutely essential when we see the president abandoning or denigrating our core principles, our core values. Donald Trump's presidency is a stress test for our country. Will Congress provide the checks and balances envisioned by our founders and relied upon by generations of Americans? Will our judiciary retain its independence and ensure that the rule of law applies even to this administration? Will law enforcement, the Department of Justice, and the FBI remain outside of politics? Will the legal power of the United States of America be subject to political whims and used for political purposes? These are questions of our time, the questions that will determine what kind of country we have during the Trump presidency and after he is gone from the White House. As lawyers and leaders in your communities around the country, I know many of you are seeking answers to these same questions. I want to focus a little bit on what I can do as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee to make sure we meet this stress test head on, to work with you to make sure that we emerge with our American values intact. Only a week after taking office, President Trump issued his first, basically, Muslim ban, we call it. In the months since, our courts have played a critical role in resisting this ill-founded action of his. The Muslim ban was a centerpiece of Donald Trump's campaign. His intent, expressed repeatedly by the president and his advisors, is to target a minority group for discrimination based on their religion. And guess what? That is unconstitutional. The president's lawyers have tried over many months to sand away its rough edges, but no court should ignore President Trump's own words and intent. At the same time, he continues to be determined to get the last tweet. I watched with admiration as lawyers and law students around the country flooded the airports on the day President Trump issued his first travel ban. And these are my role models, people using their skills to help people being screwed to protect their rights. Actually, I use that word quite a lot these days. And even before President Trump, I used to tell my staff, look, there are people getting screwed in our country every single second, minute, hour of the day, and if by our efforts we can decrease that number, we will be making a difference, we will be doing our jobs. And I think I said this at the beginning of Neil Gorsuch's hearing, or it might have been during Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearing, I'm not sure. But I remember Dick Durbin coming up to me and saying, Mazie, you said something in the beginning of the hearing that has never been said before. And he kind of paraphrased what I had said. He didn't get it quite right, but the word is screwed. At a time when many questioned whether our laws and institutions would stand, this action by so many of our friends and compadres and lawyers was a most American response. And I was also proud when Judge Derek Kahala Watson of Hawaii rightly issued a stay of the unconstitutional travel ban. With his outrageous reaction to Judge Watson's decision, Attorney General Sessions showed how little he and this administration understand America. Sessions questioned, and remember, the world was in flames, there were a lot of things happening, but you don't know how many people got all really incensed about Sessions saying, quote, how can a judge sitting on an island in the Pacific, end quote, rule on the legality of the Muslim ban for the whole country? I had fun with my tweet on that. I said, hey, Jeff Sessions, Hawaii's a state. Has been a state for 58 years. Soldiers from Hawaii have fought and bled for this country for generations, and in fact, some of the most decorated soldiers came from Hawaii, and people like Daniel Inouye. So rulings like Judge Watson's or Judge Oryx's in San Francisco to protect sanctuary cities are the strongest possible reminders that judges matter. The fate of the un-American Muslim ban now rests with the Supreme Court. And you can bet that I will be watching very closely how Neil Gorsuch weighs in. I am hopeful that the Supreme Court will take the wise approach of Chief Judge Roger Gregory and the 10-judge majority on the Fourth Circuit, who said the president's order, and I quote, speaks with vague words of national security, but in context drips with religious intolerance, animus, and discrimination, end quote. The Fourth Circuit's opinion also embraced the American commitment to the rule of law. To further quote the opinion, the question for this court, distilled to its essential form, is whether the Constitution remains a law for rulers and people, equally in war and in peace. At a time when a president calls judges with whom he disagrees so-called judges, we need our courts to continue to uphold the law. This is one check on Donald Trump. The check provided by the courts against the unlawful Muslim ban is a reminder that we must have qualified, diverse, and independent judges in federal courts throughout the country. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, I will continue to fight for judges who will stand up for the rule of law, who will stand up to President Trump and his ilk. It is particularly fitting to point to Chief Judge Gregory as an example. He would not be sitting on the Fourth Circuit without his recent appointment by President Clinton in 2000. He became the first African-American judge on the Fourth Circuit after years of anonymous Republican holds and blue slips prevented Bill Clinton's nominees to that court from even having hearings. The fight over judicial nominations continues, and the stakes couldn't be higher. From their filibuster of Judge David Hamilton, President Obama's very first judicial nominee, to their brazen blocking of Merrick Garland's nomination to the Supreme Court, Senate Republicans have made clear that they fully understand the stakes. Judge Gorsuch is now on the Supreme Court, likely for decades, because Senate Republicans had a plan, and they used every tool at their disposal to solidify a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, a conservative majority that will continue to favor corporate interests over individual rights of ordinary, everyday Americans. President Trump and Senate Republicans will now seek to do the same on the lower courts. In the Senate, Democrats must also use the tools at our disposal to ensure an independent judiciary through hearings, committee votes, and floor debate. And we also must insist that the Senate respect the blue slip process. And until I got to the nomination of Judge Gorsuch and so much preparation time, I really wasn't familiar with the blue slip process, but it's time-honored. The blue slips enable home state senators to ensure that the federal judges serving in their states are highly qualified, understand the importance of applying the law fairly, and meet the needs of their community. We cannot become a rubber stamp for the president's nominees, and we must fight to prevent him from eroding the quality and independence of the federal judiciary. We also have to work together to uphold the principle that no president is above the law. The ongoing investigation into the Trump-Russia matter reads like a spy novel come to life. And while it might read like a spy novel, the facts are disturbing enough on their own. We know that Vladimir Putin's Russia, one of our main adversaries on the world stage, interfered in our election to help elect Donald Trump. We know this despite the president's continuing refusal to accept the unanimous conclusions of our law enforcement and intelligence communities that is exactly what happened, and reinforced by former FBI Director Comey's testimony yesterday before the Senate Intelligence Committee, on which I served for 2 years. So we also know that there is real evidence that supports further investigation of whether the Trump campaign team colluded with the Russians. And I think one of the biggest challenges for those of us on the Judiciary Committee is sort of dealing with Donald Trump's reaction to these facts and allegations. From Director Comey's testimony yesterday, we know that the president basically pressured Mr. Comey to go easy on Mike Flynn and fired Director Comey to make the Russian investigation go away. He even bragged to the Russians about the firing the very next day. The president's actions in this matter demonstrates his contempt for the rule of law, a core American value. The Senate and the Judiciary Committee have more work to do. My predecessor, Senator Daniel Inouye, earlier in his Senate career, served with great distinction on the Senate Watergate Committee. And I know those of us who were born at that time, we were riveted watching those hearings. So comparisons to our current situation, I think, are appropriate. I am proud, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, to carry on Senator Inouye's tradition of congressional oversight. I will continue to use the confirmation process to ensure the traditional high standards of the Justice Department are met, with the nominees committed to independent law enforcement based on justice and the facts, not politics. And I will look seriously at whether Chris Wray, President Trump's nominee to be the next FBI director, can be above politics, and we must make sure his loyalty pledge is to the Constitution and the country, not to Donald Trump. No abuse of power or obstruction of justice by a president should undermine our country's commitment to democracy and the rule of law. So I go back to my opening question. In the age of Trump, where up is down, down is up, we're down a rabbit hole, how do we stay true to our core values as Americans? I think one of the outcomes of the event on November 8th is that so many people, as I mentioned earlier, have awakened to what we need to do as citizens of this country, and our recognition of what it means to be an American, to be engaged, to stay engaged. And we must protect American values by keeping strong institutional checks on the power of a dangerous and chaotic presidency. And to survive this stress test, we must work to protect the independence of the federal judiciary, and we must ensure that nobody is above the law. And I look to the leadership from each and every one of you and all of the law students who are here. I wish you the best, and I am hopeful that what will happen after you get your law degrees is that you will become servants of the people. I think lawyers and politicians have a particular calling, and we have the power through our positions and our education to fight for people who are getting screwed every single second, minute, hour of the day. And on that really positive note, mahalo nui loa to each and every one of you. It's an honor and privilege to be here to spend some time with you all. Aloha.